everyone. All right, well, here for Lab 4, we have a file of grades. There are, let's see, if I go to cell A2 and I shift control down, let's see, there are 300, as I can see from my count at the bottom here, there are 300 students' grades in this file. These are fictitious students with grades of what we currently have as Lab 1 here, Lab 2, Lab 3, Lab 4, and Lab 5, along with quizzes, Quiz 1, Quiz 2, Quiz 3A, 3B, Quiz 4, and then Exam 1 and Exam 2. So what I'd like to do is complete this file by using an if statement to populate the midterm grade. We will use our sum formula to tally up the points for the semester. We will then use a VLOOKUP to calculate the grade. And then I'm going to show you, we're going to insert a pivot table here in cell U2. It'll be very important that you insert your pivot table exactly in cell U2, and I'll show you how to compute relative frequencies, in other words, percents. So we'll do a relative distribution of the grades, the letter grades. And then lastly, I'd like to show you the power of what is known as index, the index function, coupled with the match function. Index and match are amazing in that we will then be able to populate for any student their grades into the cells you see here. So in this case, we'll populate for student number 1346, who happens to be here. We'll populate these grades. We won't be just hard coding them. We'll use a formula so that if we change this to student 1482, all of the grades would change. If we changed it to student 1385, all of the grades would change. And I'll even show you some conditional formatting with that. Okay, so here we go. The first part, as you can see, you're going to fill in the cream cells. So you're going to fill in column I, column O, column P. You're going to put a pivot table here in cell U2, as I mentioned. And then what we are going to do is we're going to use index match to fill in these cells. So the first criteria is for midterm. Well, we're going to say that someone earns a midterm satisfactory, in other words, MS, a midterm satisfactory, if they earn at least a certain number of points thus far in the course. And the number of points we'll use for a cutoff for midterm satisfactory will be 154 points, because the maximum number of points, I believe here, is 270, and then if we take those maximum number of points and multiply by 70%, we will have the 154 points that I speak of. Actually, I was wrong. The maximum here is 220 points. 15 points on Lab 1, Lab 2, and Lab 3, 25 points on Quiz 1, Quiz 2, Quiz 3A, and then 100 points on Exam 1, has a maximum of 220 points, 70% of that being 154 points. So anything above 154 points will deem midterm satisfactory. Below 154 points will deem midterm unsatisfactory. So let's say if, we'll use our if statement, if, and we're going to embed the if with our sum statement. So if the sum of, and now please, when you're entering your formulas, do them exactly as I'm entering. No extra spaces, no extra referencing. Do it exactly as I'm entering here, and if you do that, you'll have much better chance of gaining full credit. So just to start again and walk through it, what you see me doing here, let me even come in a little closer. Well, there we go. Just a moment so I can get closer for you. Here we go. So what I want you to do is enter as I am doing, equals, no extra spaces or extra typing characters, but if, and then we'll use sum. If the sum of, now if the sum of what? Well, we're going to choose our first few grades. So you should have if the sum of B2 to H2. If the sum of B2 to H2, now do not put any referencing there, because if you do, you won't be able to move down respectively for the next student. We want this sum to, as we go down for the next student, we want the blue region to move down into row 3 and move down into row 4. So we're just going to leave this relative referencing. But if this sum, and it should be, look just like I have it right now, if sum B2 colon H2, if that sum is greater than or equal to, and you need the greater than or equal to, 154 is going to be our cut point, 70% of the total points. So let's just do, if the sum of the region B2 to H2 is at least, which is greater than or equal to, at least 154 points, comma, now do not type a space, just put your quote. There should be no spaces here at all. We're going to enter MS for midterm satisfactory, end quote. Now remember, for all categorical or text data, we need the data in quotes. And then comma, no spaces, no space, quote, MU. End quote, end our command. As you can see, I don't have any spaces. I just started with my if, and there is no spaces. Everything's entered. So what's going to happen is if our sum is at least 154, then Excel will populate the column I with MS. If the sum is less than 154, so if that's false, it'll populate with MU. I do not have spaces between the quote and the comma and the quote and the text. There are absolutely no spaces here. Everything is in one typed string. I'm going to hit enter. And so this first student has midterm satisfactory. Let me back out here for you so you can see the whole thing again. And then if I go ahead and I drop, because my cells are contiguous, I can just go ahead and drop my formula. I'll have the result for all of my students very quickly, all 300 of them. Now you'll see this one here's, in my data set, yours will be different. In mine, this one's unsatisfactory, which means that the sum must have been less than 154 if I added these scores up. And obviously it is, because the person didn't even do lab 1 or lab 3. This is unsatisfactory. Here we have a satisfactory score. And you can see, because we did not apply referencing, that the sum corresponds to the row location of our formula. Okay, so now don't worry about the green. The green here, if you wanted to get rid of the green, I can show you how you would do. This is saying that it's giving you a caution, as if there might be an error in your formula, but there's really not. It just realizes that you've done something a little different than it expected you to do. And what you did a little different than it may have expected is you didn't include the data in column A, which it also recognizes as numerical data. So it's just saying, hey, basically what it's saying here is, did you want to include column A? And we don't. So you can either just leave the green arrows are just a caution, or if you wanted to get rid of them for future reference, if I click here in cell I2, shift control down, and then I just go up to that little caution symbol, and I can say just ignore the error. Now you don't have to do that, not necessary, but just so you can see how to do it. Okay, so now I know who's going to be midterm satisfactory or midterm unsatisfactory. It could be sent to the registrar's office, and we're all set really quickly with 300 scores. And if I had 5,000 scores, it would be just as quick, because all I had to enter was my one formula. And once I enter my one formula, there's my caution statement again. I dragged my formula down. Again, I can get rid of that caution statement very easily. Okay, now let's move on and assume the rest of the semester has gone by. We have completed lab 4, lab 5, a couple more quizzes, and exam 2, which is out of 200 points. So what are the total number of points the students have received for the semester? Well, I want you to enter just as I'm entering. Let me make this bigger again for you. There we go. So just as I'm entering, you're going to enter equals sum. And let's take the sum of the first part of the semester, and again, no referencing, and add that to the second part of the semester, no referencing. I hit enter and I'll back out. Oh, I forgot nope, I'm sorry about that. let's say no, because I see what I did. Okay, it's yelling at me. See, I ended my parenthesis there, and I didn't want to do that. There we go. I'll show you this formula in just a moment. I'm getting an error. What is going on? Let's look what I did. So I'm taking the sum. Oh, I have a plus there. Of course, we don't want a plus. We want the sum of the first part of the semester, and then I want a comma for the second part of the semester. So what it's doing is it's going to add this range and then the second range. The reason I didn't just grab the entire range, let's show you that. Come on. There we go. Is because we have text data in here, because MS is text data, and I just don't want to be in the habit of incorporating text data, as you never know with your text data. Maybe one of your text data values at some point has a numerical value and you don't want to throw off your total. So I'd rather see you do not use this formula or you will get points off. What I want you to see for full credit is no spaces. You're just going to type sum and you're going to grab B2 to H2, no referencing, comma, no spaces, no referencing, J2 to N2, end parenthesis. This will give us the same 457. But like I said, if this happened to be anything numerical, if we had grabbed it, it would have thrown off our data. So I'd rather you don't do that. And I'd like to see it to get full credit will look exactly like this. Equals sum B2 to H2, comma, J2 to N2, no spaces, no referencing. Enter. Because my columns are contiguous, I can go ahead and double click to autofill. I have all of my sums now for my total number of points this semester. Again, it's giving me a caution, and the reason it's giving me a caution is it realized we left out a column of information. So if you wanted to get rid of the caution again, just click your first cell, shift control down to grab all of your cells, and go ahead and click that little caution symbol, and you can say ignore error. Okay, well, now we have the total number of points, and now that we have the total number of points, we can come up with the student's letter grade. A student received, in my data, yours will be different, but in my data, the first student received 457 points. We need 455 points to earn an A minus and 470 to earn an A. They didn't reach that A mark, but this student should have an A minus. So let's see. What I think of here is I think quickly of a V, a vertical lookup. There's a couple problems though with this with a vertical lookup. And one of the problems is when you do a VLOOKUP, what you're looking up needs to come in the first column. So my first column needs to be what I'm looking up. Well, I have a problem with that because the first column is my letter grades. So what we would need to do here, let's go ahead and I'll show you that it doesn't work. Let me show you first that it doesn't work. If I do a VLOOKUP of this number of points in this array of data, and you'll want to absolute reference your array of data, so as you move down, that your formula doesn't move. And again, enter it exactly as I'm entering. And then I tell it to give me back what's in the first column, because that's where my letter grades are. I'm not going to do a false command. I'm going to do a true command because we have approximate values here, and hit enter. It's going to give me an error. And of course it will. It's not the way the VLOOKUP works. So what we need to do here is we need to reverse these cells. So let's go ahead and just copy this information. All I did was grab it and Control C. If I grab the information and Control C, I get my dancing ants, and let's paste it to the right of what we're trying to look up. So Control V pastes. Now what I'd like to do is I want to keep my spreadsheet the way I had it. So I am going to take and just delete. I'm going to go delete, and I'm going to say go ahead and shift the cells left, okay? But I want this back in U, so I'm going to insert, and I'm going to shift the cells right. There we go. What you should have is the same thing that you see here now. In R and S, you should have your data. And then in cell U, you should have the yellow highlighting. So make sure you have that correct. And you can always rewind the video and watch what I did again. Now, 457 shouldn't be a grade of 0. So let's see what's going on here. Well, we're trying to look up what's in O2, which was the number of points. Okay, I need to change some things. We're going to look up this entire array. Now that I have my points first, I should be able to get my letter grade in column 2, right? Well, let's see what happens. Hit enter. And again, make sure you have everything entered just as I do. No extra spaces, no extra referencing. Leave it just O2 with no referencing, and R2 to S11 should be absolute referencing. Hit enter. Well, goodness gracious, a 457 is not an F. A 457 is actually an A minus. Well, here's the other thing with a VLOOKUP. The other part of a VLOOKUP is that when you do a VLOOKUP, your data cannot be as you see here, which is in, if you look from top down, descending order. You need your data to be in ascending order. It's very important with a VLOOKUP that the data is in ascending order, so I need this flipped around. I need to actually go from smallest to largest rather than largest to smallest. Well, if I try, watch this for a moment, if I try to sort here and I just go to 470 and I right click and I say sort and I say, okay, I want to sort smallest to largest, look what happens. I have a sorting error. You have to be very careful with when you sort. There's a couple ways around this. The easiest way around this, I'm going to Control Z to undo what I just did. Control Z always undoes your last action. One of the best ways with sorting, so you don't make sorting errors are so very common, is to go ahead and give this little array a title, give column headers. So we're going to call this points, and we're going to call this grade. And now that I've given this headers, I can go ahead and grab this, and I want you to do the same thing. Go ahead and grab from R1 down to S11, go to data and create a filter. Now that we've created a filter, it's like a mini table, if you will. Now I can very nicely sort. So go ahead and in your arrow, go smallest to largest. Look at that. It did it right. It did smallest to largest. I don't have to worry about any weird sorting errors that could have occurred. When you put your filters on, it's so nice. You don't have to worry about weird sorting errors. And now we can see a 457 points is definitely an A minus, as it should be. My VLOOKUP is working. I have a VLOOKUP of the points in column O, and I happen to be in row 2. O2, my array needs to stay from R2 to S11, which is why I have it absolute referenced, and I want it to return the data in the second column. And I don't want the false command because I don't have all of these exact values of points in my table. I'm going to use the true command for the approximate match. And now if I go ahead and autofill, I very quickly have all my grades. You can see a 388 is a C. Why is a 388 a C? Well, if we start and the VLOOKUP goes in ascending order, I'd start at 0 and say, okay, well, 388 is more than 0. 325 is more than 388 is more than 325. 388 is more than 355, so I keep going. It's a vertical lookup. We keep vertically looking up. 388 is more than 370. 388 is, oops, not more than 395, so back it up. 388 is a C. If we were to look at the grade of 433 points, same thing. 433 is greater than 0, it's greater than 325, greater than 355, greater than 370, greater than 395, greater than 405, greater than 420. 433 is not greater than 445, so we go back, and a 433 is a B. So now we have all our grades. And what I would suggest you do now is I would look at this information, and if you're never going to add to this information, just leave it as it is. If you know that you have all the data that you need, we can go ahead and insert our pivot table. If you think you'll be adding to this information and you'll want, therefore, your pivot table to update, like we did in the last lab, you'll want to hit Control T and turn your data into a table. And yes, your table has headers as it should, and you could say, okay. I'm not going to do that in this case just because there's no need, because honestly, it is going to throw off what the rest of your formulas are going to look at. So don't turn this into a table. You don't want to turn this into a table. If you already did, then I would start over again, but you're not going to want to turn this into a table in this case because we don't need to. We have all the data we need. So we're going to go ahead and insert our pivot table, and you must insert it in cell U2. So if you remember, the shortcut for inserting a pivot table is put your cursor anywhere inside your data. You hit your Alt-NV. Alt-NV opens up your pivot table dialog box. If you don't remember the shortcut commands, you can just, in your data field, go to Insert and go to Pivot Table, and you'll get the same menu to appear. We have our table selected. Now we want to go to Existing Worksheet, and the location, make sure you click in the location box, and once you've clicked in that location box, make sure you click in the box first. Go ahead and click cell U2. So you should see grades U2 down here. Remember, up here it should say grades A1 to P301 absolute referenced. Go ahead and say OK. And now we're going to create a pivot table, and what I would like to do is look at the distribution of grades. So let's go ahead and put our grades in our row category, because that would be along our horizontal axis if we were to do a graph. And really what we want is, at first we want to find a count, because remember, these grades are non-numerical, so we can't do any mathematical calculations on them other than counting them and finding percents. So let's go ahead and take the grade again and drag it into our sum of values. And because it's text data, the pivot table automatically counts. It gives me a tally. 45 students received an A, 27 students received an A-, 26 students failed, 20 students received a D, etc. This is the count. But the count doesn't really give me the information I would want to present. So let's look at the percentages. How could we turn this count into a relative? So instead of just a frequency, let's turn this into a relative frequency. Well, if we simply go down into the bottom corner here to our value field settings, likewise, you could grab count of grade, and you could also go to value field settings there, either place. We'll go ahead and go to value field settings, and let's name this relative frequency, which is a percent, right? Relative frequency, which is a percent. The only thing we can do is to count, but we want to show the values as, and I want to show the values as the percent of the grand total, the percent out of all 300 students. So let's go ahead and say percent of grand total, click OK, and look at that. I have my percentages for my grade distribution. I don't like seeing all these extra decimal places. That's not professional, so go ahead and let's format this. Just right click in your relative frequency, go to number format. We have percentages. Go ahead and say 0 decimal places, say OK. Much better. You must have your data in U2, and then you will take and have your grades in the rows. You will have dragged grade into the sum of the values, which will then give you the count, but we changed it to the relative frequency versus just the frequency. Now, just to show you, if we also wanted to have the count in here for some reporting purposes, I could go ahead and drag grade down in here again. Let me get rid of the pivot table fields. And now I do have the count of grades. If I want my pivot table fields again, by the way, because I don't have that right now, I can just go to the Analyze tab, and there's my field list. If you ever lose it, don't forget. There it is. Okay, so let's change this. Instead of count of grade, let's call this frequency. So we have the frequency, but I'd like to report the frequency first. I want to show you that in a pivot table you can move your values. So just grab frequency until you get the little black arrows, and you can just move it over. So make sure your frequency is in column V. So here in column U, you should have your row labels of your grades. In column V, you should have the count, or the frequency, of each grade. And now we have the relative frequency of your grades. And you're going to want to go ahead and rename these headers. Okay, now the last thing I want to show you on the pivot table is that we did before in the last lab, we talked about grouping dates. You can group just about anything you want, names, categories, dates, numbers. You can group anything in your pivot table. Let's group our categories into categories of, just to make it simple, A, B, C, D, and F grades. Let me show you how to do that. So you can go ahead and select cell U3 U3. As you can see, I have cell U3 selected here, and I'm going to select the cell below it, cell U4. Now, if I had cells that weren't next to one another, I'd grab a cell and then hit Shift and grab another cell that would grab a whole section of cells. Or if I want to grab individual cells, I can grab a cell and then hit Control and grab another, and I can group these two together, which I don't know why you'd want to do that. But, and if I hit Control, I can grab another cell. Whoops, sorry. Hitting Control and grabbing more than one cell allows you to group them together. But let's not do that. Let's just grab cell A, or for the grade of A, and drag down. We want our A's to be grouped together, so right click, and let's group those. And we'll call this, these are the grades that are A's. And we can minimize that grouping. Now let's grab our B's and put our B's together. So we'll grab here and cell what's actually U4 now. U4 down and grab all the B's down to the B plus. And I'm going to group. We're going to call this our B's. You're going to go B apostrophe S, capital B, enter. And go ahead and minimize that. Let's grab our C's, group. We'll call this our C's. And then, honestly, we'll just leave this our D. Wait, there's only one D category. There's no D's. So we'll leave this D's. We'll just minimize, and we'll leave the failures as F's. Now I have a distribution of just the A's, the B's, the C's, the D's, and the F's. And you can see that the most frequent grade is a B, which is to be expected. I have, if I were to just look at the C's, the B's, and the A's, it appears to be pretty much of a normal distribution. We have the A's and the C's slightly lower than the B's, but then we have our outliers, our F's, that are skewing our data and bringing the class average down. And so this information, if we went from A to F, as you can see, we're skewed here. We'd have the low grades, the very low grades would be skewing our data, making our mean less than the median, so it would be skewed left a bit. But okay, so what you should have at this point, let's just to back out and make sure we're all on the same page. At this point, you should have your column I sorted, and you have your formula inserted in all of the cells for column I. You don't have any spaces extra than I do. Everything's in one string. And you're reporting whether the student has midterm satisfactory or unsatisfactory grades based on if their points are at least 154. We have the total number of points for each student, and again, no extra spaces, no referencing, typed in just as you see it here to get the total number of points for the first half and the second half of the semester. And then we did some work with our VLOOKUP information. We ended up taking our information, doing some cutting and some pasting, and then throwing in some filters so that we could sort in the order where the grades are ascending, because we need the ascending order for our VLOOKUP. And so you can see here, again, no spaces. Make sure your referencing is exactly the same. And some of you in the last lab, after the true command, you put these extra set of parentheses. You do not need those there. There's no need for them. So make sure you don't have those extra set of parentheses. It should look exactly as I have here. You have, otherwise you won't receive the maximum number of points. You have VLOOKUP of O2 from comma from R2 to S11 with no spaces here, comma no space with a 2 because we want the data in the second column, comma no space with true, no extra parentheses. You're all done. You hit enter. And again, you can see that I'm getting that little caution. If you have the caution there, that's fine, but you can always choose to ignore the caution error. Okay, and then we created our pivot table. We inserted our pivot table, and we came up with the count, the relative count, the relative frequency, and we grouped our data. And you can always rewind the video if you need to go back. And again, remember, your data will be different in your table because we have different results. However, it may be that your frequencies and your relative frequencies will be the same. It may or may not be. I can't guarantee depending on your data set. Now, the last really cool thing I want to show you is the power of index match, actually. See, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how we can look up any in particular student and get a grade report for that student, which is super cool. So let's look at lab 1 for student 1346. Well, I realized I could find student 1346, and I could go in my data set, go do control F, by the way. Control F is the find command, and I could do 1346, enter, and there's student 1346. If I want student 1245, I can hit enter, and I go straight to student 1245. Well, that's fine and dandy, but then I would have to hard code the values in here, and I don't want to hard code because I want to be able to put any student number here and be able to come out with their grades. So no hard coding, I want a formula here. Okay, well, how do I come up with the grades for student 1346? Well, this is where a VLOOKUP and a lookup aren't going to work for us. We're going to use the power of what's called index match. Now, when we do index match, what you're going to do, and I'm going to again just scoot over a little bit. You're going to start to type in index. And again, you want to type this in exactly as I do, no spaces, exact referencing, just a string of information. The first thing you do with index is we're going to use this index array, not the reference, so the array. Because we need to index an entire array. Think of a rectangular array. The array means where is the data that you are going to want. So what do we want? We want the grades for lab 1, quiz 1, lab 2, quiz 2, etc. We want those grades. Where do we find them? Well, we find them here. So once you type index in your parentheses, no spaces, go ahead and grab cell B2. And then where these grades are found are B2, holding down and continuing all the way over to N2. Don't worry about grabbing the midterm because we won't use that section. Now make sure you do shift control down so that you don't have to scroll all the way down to the bottom of your data set, depending on how long your data set is. Right now I can just let go of my mouse and hit shift control down, and Excel automatically knows to grab all the way to the first break in my data. That's why it's important that my data is contiguous. Now to get back up to my data, I can hit the F4 key, because the F4 key gives me that absolute reference that I do need for the array. As I move down into my other grades, I don't want my array to move down. I want my array to stay put. I don't want it to move down. I want it to stay put, so you need that absolute reference. Hit a comma, do not type a space, and right after the comma, so there's where our data is. But now what index says is index says, where's the data you want to find? What's the row number, and then what's the column number? Well, the row number will be whatever row student 1346 is in. Where's student 1346? Well, gosh golly, who knows? Well, I can look and I can see student 1346 is, where was student? In mine, student 1346 is in row 12, but I don't want to hard code a 12 there. Because if I hard code a 12, I'm always going to get student 1346. What you do is you couple the match command. And what the match command does is it allows you to match a value to an array. So watch this. We're going to match, what's my lookup value? What do I want to match? Think of matching. I want to match whatever is in this cell here in S14. And go ahead and hit your F4 key, because as we move down, we always want our match to go back up to this student. I want to match this student, and now hit a comma and no space. Where's the array that you're going to match this student? Where would you find that? Well, the array, now, by the way, we're doing our row match here. So the rows that I'm going to find student 1346 start in A2, and then shift control down, go to the bottom of my data set. So I'm also going to F4 here because I always want to stay in that array. So what we're going to do is then we're going to hit comma, no spaces. We're going to do an exact match, because here's what's going to happen with just this portion. This is row number portion. For match, this part of the formula says match student 1346. That's here, match student 1346 in this purple section, and it's going to come up with the row that student 1346 is in. Student 1346 is in row 12. So it tells index, go to row 12. That's what it's doing. But go to row 12, but then what column do I want? Okay, well, we're going to hit a comma because now we're on column number. Well, lab 1 in my data in the blue field is in column 1 of my blue field. Quiz 1 is in column 2 of my blue array. Remember, we indexed the array B2 to N301. So student 1346 is in the row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, is in actually row 11. I'm sorry, not row 12. Row 11, it's going to find that in row 11, as is 1346 is in row 11, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's going to come up with 11 because it's 11 from the purple region. And then I wanted to come up with lab 1. Well, how am I going to match that? Well, watch this. As long as you're spelling and everything's exactly the same, we can say match, and now it's hidden, but I'm going to go ahead and just type it in because I know what it is. It's R15. Let's match R15, and I can see the green underneath. Hit my F4 key, and I want to match that to my titles in my columns. I'm matching the column. I'm going to hit F4. Notice no spaces. I want another exact match. And I have to hit my parenthesis one more time to get my black parenthesis. I'll zoom on this in a moment. I'm going to hit enter right now, and we'll see that student 1346 earned 15 points on lab 1. Well, let's see. Student 1346 did earn 15 points on lab 1. Well, if I've done this correctly, I should get that they earned 26.4 points on quiz 1. Let's see. Drag it down. 15 points on quiz 1. Well, let's see what happened here. I didn't want to stay lab 1, did I? Look what happened here. So we index our entire region. So we've indexed our entire region of data. And when you put in your index, that's the array of where your data sits, not including the matching columns and rows. So here's where our data sits. And we want to match the student value, and that's here in S14. I always want it to stay in S14. And where am I going to find 1346? Well, I'm going to find it in the array from A2. Make sure it's A2 and not A1. From A2 to A301, and you want to absolute reference that with an exact match of 0. And then comma, no spaces, another match. But now this time, I don't want R15 to stay R15. If I do that, I'll always get the score for lab 1. Go ahead and take off your absolute referencing for R15. So what you're going to do is you're going to have to go back, actually. Go back here, I'm sorry, and take off. There we go. Take off your absolute referencing for R15. Now, when I drag my formula down, there we go. The student 1346 earned 26.4 points on quiz 1, earned 15 points on lab 2. What's happening down here? Oh, well, and you know what we did? What we did is, and I want you to see where it matters. This is where I wanted you to see where it matters what you pick for your array. We only arrayed and we only grabbed our values up until exam 2, didn't we? Well, we want points and grade as well. But you know what's super cool is go into your first formula here and simply take your blue region and extend it so that the array you're matching includes points and grades, but don't forget to extend the column titles as well. Points and grade. Now watch, these non-applicable errors will go away. Hit enter. And then we need to extend our formula. Gone. Look at that. So student 1346 did have 433 points and earned a B. Now, let's look at the student right below, 1482 with 345 points and a D. Let's see, if I put 1482, look at that. 300 and, no, it's not rounded. We can go ahead and round that. Go to the home. There we go. 345 points and a score of a letter grade of a D. Any student number I put in here, I'll automatically get their points. Now, I want you to leave the student number that was already populated. Do not change the student number that you had in your file. So leave that student number there. But what's going to happen now is the last thing I want to show you. Well, before I do this, actually, I just want to zoom in on the index match formula for you. So what did we do here? Well, we indexed our entire data region from B2 to P301. No spaces. We need an absolute reference there. Comma match, no spaces. What are we doing? In that index region, we want to match our student number, and we need an absolute reference for that student number so that as we move down to the next categories, it always stays whatever student number remains with the student number we have populated. And where are we going to match that in? Well, that was in the array of A2, not A1, but A2 to A301, and we need to stay there and absolute reference A2 to A301. And we want an exact match. That's our match type of 0. Then no extra parentheses, no extra spaces. You just need a comma and then match. And what we're matching then is behind here, but you can see the green. We're matching R15, which happens to be Lab 1, I believe, in this case. And remember, don't have any referencing here because we want this to move down to the next category of information. And we're matching that from B, not A1, but B1 to P1 with an exact match. Again, no spaces or anything in here. And then you need your 2 parentheses. Now, it's pretty important for the index match to work in this case that our typing is exactly the same, because you see if I had grades here for some reason and then grade, I'm going to get an error. So what you want to be sure of when you do something like this is I simply just copy. I say copy and paste, and then when you copy and paste, you'll know that it's going to work, right? So that's the best way to make sure everything's exactly the same, because any derivation in spaces or typing will throw off the index match. Okay, the last thing I'm going to show you, now remember, keep your student number exactly what your student number was when you received your file so that the grading is done appropriately. And then I want to show you the very last thing is conditional formatting. And this is super cool. This is going to be optional. You could be done if you wanted to. But I just want to show you how you can conditional format now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of my information from cell A2 all the way over, shift control right and down. I grabbed from A2, shift control right and down, and then I'm going to go to the home ribbon. I'm going to go to conditional formatting, and I'm going to go to new rule. I want a new rule. I want my rule, if you want to follow along with me, to be a formula to determine which cells to format. And then I'm going to click in here and I'm going to say format values where this formula is true. I'm going to click this red so that I can go ahead and go up in my sheet. Okay, here's the formula I want. I want to put an equals, and every formula starts with an equals. And I'm going to click cell A2. You'll notice it's absolute referenced. Because it's absolute reference, that means all of my conditional formatting will always look to cell A2, and I don't want that to happen. I want to match to this student grade that's here in cell, in column S, in S14. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I just want to stay in column A. So I'm going to hit F4 until I get the $ just on the absolute column reference, so that every cell, so that cell B2 will look to column A, cell C2 will look to column A, cell D2 will look to column A, cell D3 will look to A3, cell F3 will look to cell A3, cell C5 will look to A5. I always want to look to column A. And if column A is equal to the value we have here and leave that S14 absolute referenced, then we're going to do some conditional formatting. So you should have equals with a column reference of A2 equal to an absolute reference of S14. Hit enter. And the way I want it to format is we're going to go to the fill, and let's just make it, oh, I don't know, let's go green. Let's go green and say, okay, watch this. Completely awesome. Say okay. Look at that. 1482. So that if I change my student number, let's make it 1529. Watch. You're going to love it. 1529. Think of the power of this if you're doing products, if you're working with an inventory spreadsheet or any type of spreadsheet. for conditional formatting. So what's happening here is every cell in row 10 is looking back to column A. So cell B10 is saying, hey, is A10 1529? Because if it is, I'm going to turn green. Cell C10 is saying, hey, is A10 number 1529? Because if it is, I'm going to turn green. Cell E8 says, hey, cell A8, are you 1529? Nope, I'm not turning green. See? Cell H16 says, hey, A16, are you 1529? Nope, I'm not going to turn green. Let's change this to 1533. Look at that. So what's happening is cell, for example, cell J7 said, hey, A7, are you 1533? Oh, you are? Good. I'm going to turn green. That's what that conditional formatting formula does. Because we absolute referenced in column A, every cell in the row is going to look back to column A and ask that question. And again, not something you have to do, optional part of the assignment, but super cool. The only thing I ask is that even if you do your conditional formatting, that you leave your student number here coded as whatever value you originally had, okay? So leave this number coded as whatever value you originally had. And actually, you know what I'll do is in lecture for you, or maybe even in an email, I'll just make sure, no, because they're different. I can't do that. I apologize. You're just going to have to make sure if you had changed that, you're going to have to save your file as a different name maybe in your computer, reopen it in your computer, and then look at that number. That's the only thing you can do. But make sure that that number is the same, okay? And remember, there's different versions of this file. Okay, that does it. Hope you learned some new skills. I know you likely did with the conditional formatting. And then there's the filtering skills that we looked at. There's the grouping as far as a pivot table. And then, of course, our powerful index match formula, which allows us to look up each individual student, and some review, a review of our if statement, and then, of course, a review of our VLOOKUP and how the VLOOKUP works. Okay, everybody, I hope this helps. If you have individual questions, please shoot an email to mgq301@buffalo.edu or to myself, and I will address individual questions via lecture so that everybody can hear them. Sound good? All right, great. Thank you.